Welcome back to another Boxscore Geeks show. We're here to tell you the Lakers probably will not win 82 games, but that's all right. We're having Chris Ye back on to check in on that, and that's pretty much going to be the show. As longtime fans of the show know, anytime we have Chris Ye on the show, we can talk Lakers 7 hours straight, which is our plan. 7 hours, all Lakers all the time. So now I'll introduce our guest and introduce us. Chris Ye, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much, Dre. Brian, it's great to be back. And of course, as you know, back in 2004, somebody asked David Stern what his ideal NBA Finals matchup would be. And perhaps in a too honest fit of rage, he answered Lakers versus Lakers.
Lakers versus Clippers. I think we'll all be robbed if that is not the Western Conference Finals. And I say that even as a Nuggets fan with how they're playing, which I'm sure we'll talk more. Anyway, yeah, we did the marquee first, so we'll do the openers. I'm Dre Alvarez, a.k.a. Nerd Numbers. Producing the show, Brian Foster, Boxscore Brian. Anything else you want to say, Brian?
No, just it's great to be back on the show with you guys, talking Lakers tonight. Damn, they look good this season, so it's going to be fun.
All right, so I'm going to give a conspiracy theory here, Chris. So obviously, as we mentioned on the show, right around Thanksgiving week, we had hoped to have you on, and then basically you were getting on a plane to Egypt. I had my son's birthday going on. Brian was busy at work. So like we had this 1 hour window we might have been able to meet, and we weren't able to, so we had to postpone it. And in that time, the Lakers destroyed the Nuggets, then on a back-to-back went into Utah, and this is one of the things we've talked before. Altitude on a back-to-back is supposed to be brutal to the visiting team. And the Lakers said, that's fine, and destroyed the Utah Jazz. So I think you planned this to basically say, I'm going to wait till the Lakers do a few things, destroy your Denver Nuggets, and then last night, Anthony Davis got 50 points, LeBron James got 32. Basically, they topped Kobe Bryant's single game together. I think it's just timing on your part. You know, I can't blame you for wanting to take a victory lap on the Lakers.
Well, what can I say? I predicted that the Lakers could potentially win 70 games. I wasn't completely serious, but the numbers did say that they could win 70 games, and right now they're on pace to win over 70 games.
Yeah, and let's so that's obviously going to be the meat and potatoes of the show. We're going to talk a little bit about Fizdale getting fired, because anytime a coach gets fired, we have to talk it. And then we'll start with last week on Lost, because last week Brian and I talked a bunch about the NCAA basically, and we had some good comments. And, you know, surprise, surprise, one of the commenters was you, Chris. So you're going to be here to answer your own comments. But first off, we've just got to give a huge shout out to Tenacious D. I'm going to assume it is the Jack Black. You know, and who's the other person in Tenacious D? I feel really bad that I'm dropping.
I believe it's Kyle.
Kyle Gass, I want to say, or Gaze, yes. Something like that.
I'll let you look, because they are a tremendously hilarious and talented band, you know. So I'm going to assume it's them actually commenting together. I'm assuming both at the keep. But Tenacious D hopped in to note that there was actually a Michigan, I believe, K through 12 or high school that had it's called the Watersmeet High School Nimrod. So there actually is a Nimrod team for high school, because we talked way in depth about the origin of the term Nimrod, how it's not an insult, how it means great hunter. And so we got to give a huge shout out to Tenacious D for bringing that up, that there is a Michigan school that has sold $35,000 in gear because they're the Nimrod. So amazing find there. The other one, I got to say, Chris, obviously you managed to do a name droppy thing, but we would expect nothing less, because basically you're our name drop person on the show. We mention you every show about how you know Silicon Valley, and I was just like recounting some story about Google, and you said that it was, I'm going to muck up this last name, I'm sure, but it is.
I'll handle it for you. Andy Bechtolsheim.
Bechtolsheim. And you were saying key of fashion, he wore Tevas and a suit the last time you saw him, and he is someone who was wise enough to see Google before Google was even able to take investments.
Yeah, this is an incredible guy. I didn't realize who he was. I was just on a bus on the way to the event, and we just happened to sit next to each other. We chatted. He was very curious. He was asking, hey, what kinds of interesting things are you seeing out there? And we had a 15 to 20-minute conversation. And it was only after we arrived and I saw the awards being handed out that I was like, oh, that was Andy. Wow.
That's awesome. The other one, I compared this comment from you, Chris, to being like LeBron James watching a recap of a show, or a game because he's got that memory and pointing out, I know you have to love this, right? When you watch a game with LeBron and after the fact, someone asked him how to play and he's like, oh yeah, Anthony Davis was over here and, Kyle Kuzma was down there and then I was being guarded by here and he moved this way and I went that way. And it's just incredible. You basically did that because I mentioned that Kobe Bryant was in Italy. This was not for high school. So with his dad, Jelly Bean Bryant, they were in Italy when he was younger. And basically he would get information about NBA players and such, but he never played high school basketball in Italy. He did come back to the States for that.
That's right. And in fact, when he was in Italy, Kobe would get VHS tapes. So VHS tapes with highlights of Larry Bird and Magic Johnson and Michael Jordan. And that was where he got a lot of his basketball education. He was watching the tapes and then going out and figuring out the moves.
And to our point, that when we were talking last week about the NCAA and one of our annoyances when people say just go overseas, we go, without a support system, telling someone to just travel thousands of miles for an education or training is not really tenable. Kobe Bryant, being the son of an NBA player who knows the European system, who can get him resources, that is a much different scenario than just a random high schooler going overseas.
Absolutely. And again, Kobe had his full support system there. He had his mother, he had his father, he had his sisters. So it wasn't like he was a teenager alone in a foreign country.
Yeah, and I mean, that was one of the books we bring up all the time on this show is Soccernomics, and they talk about Brazilian soccer players who seem to have trouble in England because, England's like one of the premier places to play soccer. I think they have the Premier League, right? And saying that some of them would struggle, and one of his hypotheses was basically the culture shock and that teams would do well to invest in essentially a travel agent. And the teams that did that, did better with that. So exact same thing we're saying, that without some huge system to support an exodus of players to the Euro League, it doesn't make sense to try and train players that way. And if you were going to invest in such a system, why wouldn't you just invest in the system we have back home?
Absolutely. And I think that people are trying to do this. I think that the G League, if it ever becomes something that doesn't have the stigma, and I think we're seeing more and more good players come out of the G League, like Lakers hero Alex Caruso, that perhaps over time people will say, you know what, we're just going to go with the professional route and we're going to learn how to play in the professional ranks.
And we have suspected that, and we talked a ton about this on last week's show, that if the NBA gets to a point where they go, these future players are worth millions of dollars, and the NCAA is risking their health or not developing them properly, that's the point we think the NBA might step in and get in front of it. And, that happens in lots of industries, right? Things like, weed is an example in the United States, right? When it's not legal and it's a hindrance, big companies stay out. And the second it becomes legal, the big companies are the ones that step in. So, we could see the same thing happening with NCAA athletes. The last comment from last week's show, got to give a huge shout out to DG22, who noted two things. His first comment, Brian, follows up something you agreed with, which is the mid-season NBA tournament, because we were talking this. The NBA saying they were thinking of having a mid-season tournament for the draft instead of the traditional tanking route. And his point really was more, this tournament was to kind of get rid of the doldrums of the mid-season, and you kind of agreed. Be curious, Chris, you got any opinions on that? If a mid-season tournament to make, the end of the season a little more exciting than it currently is?
I think the big question is what's at stake in that mid-season tournament. If it's just some sort of notional trophy that nobody cares about, it's going to have all the excitement of the NIT. So I think that you'll have to come up with something that will motivate people. Could be money, although it's hard to figure that there's enough money there to do it. And of course, the owners are not going to do anything that doesn't make them more money. The other, I know that Bill Simmons has had some crazy suggestions about the tournament somehow counting towards the standings. Like if you win the tournament, you get an extra 10 wins or something like that. But again, I feel like these things are gimmicky. If there is a reason for a tournament, it's probably an end-of-the-season tournament with play-in games.
I would love changing up the playoff system. And in past, that has been the easiest thing. So a few things that people forget is that way back in the day, the number one seeds got a bye round to the first round of the draft. So as much as I think we call him the Greek god of stats of basketball, that's been your nickname for Magic Johnson for years, Chris. Mm-hmm. One of the reasons he falls a little flat against, say, LeBron James, maybe taking that title, is that for the first 4 years of his career and Larry Bird's, they got a bye in the first round of the playoffs. So they had to play less playoff games. And then it used to be when they finally did introduce a first round for the number 1 seeds, it would be a best of 5 instead of a best of 7. Sorry, my watch battery is dying. So, when you look at LeBron James, how he's had to play a best of 7 against one of the most competitive NBAs, even if you view the Eastern Conference as weak, in the past, instead of playing a weak team in the first round that you might lose to, they would play no team.
Well, it's all a question of perspective. Whether you want to believe that the best player is Laker LeBron James, Laker Magic Johnson, or Laker legend Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, I'm relatively indifferent.
You could also, he's kind of a sleeper one that I think doesn't get his due. So you could even say one of the more underrated greats. People accept he's great, but he's also a Laker, is Karl Malone. I think Karl Malone, despite being a 2-time MVP because he played his whole career in Utah, I think doesn't get as much love as you would expect on those lists.
I think that's true, but I do think that in the end, the problem with Karl Malone is he wasn't the greatest at his position in his era. He was very consistent, but he had the misfortune of playing at the same time as Charles Barkley.
I was going to say, you're going to put Charles. I can't really disagree with that. Yeah, it's not. Yeah.
And I'll say, guys, as far as conventional wisdom goes, most people will say Stockton and Malone are a step down because they never won a title. With 3 of us, we'll probably say that's bullshit, but I think that's conventional wisdom.
I think the fun part about Stockton Malone is that they are the greatest duo in NBA history. And actually a funny note that we give Kobe Bryant all the time is longevity is just a hard thing, right? As great as we think, say, Magic Johnson is, there is something to be said about Kobe Bryant being one of these few players that had, a 20-year career that had greatness in the regular season and postseason. It is hard to have longevity, great regular season play, and great postseason play. And as soon as you start doing those filters, it's really hard for other people to match it. Now, of course, we would say, for instance, LeBron James has easily surpassed it. Tim Duncan, a year behind. I think he was drafted a year after Kobe or a year before. I forget which. Easily surpassed it. But it's still a very short list that, only he is on. So Stockton and Malone, though, no duo in NBA history, barring something weird happen, is ever going to match that longevity.
On a single team. And for the record, Tim Duncan was drafted 1 year after Kobe Bryant. He was in the 1997 draft.
Yeah, I knew they were same era. The reason I enjoy Tim Duncan compared to Kobe Bryant is that when you get Michael versus Kobe or even Kobe versus LeBron, you have to deal with cross era. And in fact, shout out to our boy Luka Doncic, who, upon hearing that he had 25 5-5 games, that he is, I think, either surpassed or tied Michael Jordan, I believe, with 19. 25 5-5 games. He said, "Man, you can't compare anybody to Michael Jordan." Of course, very much like former Laker Josh Hart is going to get the NBA stats nerds incensed and go, "Of course you can." But then very much like Josh Hart, we go, "But the numbers love you, so it's okay."
Here's to Josh Hart, and we're going to talk more about him later on.
Okay. And last one, I don't know how far down this rabbit hole we'll go, but it is an interesting perspective and one that I oscillate on all the time. Obviously, we bashed the NCAA last week on the show a lot, which is shooting fish in the barrel. I noted that as soon as I wrote my post, I got some comments, but I knew all of the comments were going to be favorable because I know my audience. But DG22 also brought up that the college system is interesting from a training perspective, and would people, instead of going to college, doing internships, trade things, whatever, would that be a better use of 4 years? And I know you and me, Chris, right? Obviously, I went the grad school route. And as we discovered on Mental Samurai, you went to school super duper young. And then, of course, went to, as Brian has noted, Stanford is, arguably the greatest athletic school out there when you factor in all sports. The idea of, the value of college in the modern landscape, in the modern world, I don't know if you wanted to touch on that at all, or if it's too meaty of a topic and we can leave it to another day.
No, I think we can definitely touch on it. We will have to leave plenty of time to talk about the Lakers, even though we've just spent all this time talking about Magic, LeBron, and Kobe.
And none to Kareem. He always gets snubbed. But yes.
Let's just spend 1 minute to appreciate the greatness of Kareem, somebody who played 4 years in college. Really, it only shows up as 3 because the freshman year didn't count back when he was there. But 4 years in college, 20 years in the pro, in an era where nobody made it that long. Somebody who was scoring and above average. He was scoring 23 points a game at the age of 38. He was still an above-average player at that point. That's pretty astonishing.
He has another one of these records. We talk a lot of records that won't be touched or whatever. He has the biggest gap between finals MVPs in NBA history. No one has had that big of a gap, which is really hard. And I don't think it ever gets done. I mean, maybe LeBron, but LeBron James will have to play until he's like 40 to do that. And then another, to keep on some of the Lakers tangent, Chris, on Twitter, I saw someone bring up that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, his acting in Airplane as well as his play might mean he's the GOAT in terms of actor/player. And of course, he was also in like Game of Death with Bruce Lee, Beverly Hills Troop, which is a funny movie. He shows up in that. And I actually said, I give that award to another Laker if you're going to go for rings and great movie performances. I'm going to go with Rick Fox. Rick Fox has been in some fantastic movies and has a ton of rings. So I think another Laker, arguably the greatest, if we're going to say multi-tool athlete actor, I give it to Rick Fox.
Rick Fox is a very handsome man, did a great job in Oz, also very good in the movie Eddie, which is truly a fantasy because it shows the Knicks winning.
I've joked about that before for those that don't know. Eddie is a movie about a horrible owner that takes over the Knicks and then puts in a fan coach. It was supposed to be Billy Crystal originally, but turned into Whoopi Goldberg, who then leads the Knicks, I think, just to the playoffs. I don't think it's a title, but that was the thing. And I joke that it's supposed to be this fantasy about this horrible owner, and somehow James Dolan is actually a worse owner than the fantasy owner in a terrible movie.
Exactly, because at least the fantasy owner is losing on purpose.
Yeah, it's Brian and I have talked this on the show. That was like the theme in 80s and 90s movies, which was owner takes over a team, wants to lose for some nefarious purposes. But okay, so we appreciated Kareem, we appreciated Rick Fox. Any thoughts? I'll let you get the capper on the NCAA. If you have any thoughts on like college as a system, how it exists in the modern world, if you think it's good or bad. Like I said, light topic for a basketball podcast.
So I think that the key thing to remember about college is that it is actually a bundle of a variety of different things. And the question is this the right bundle? So if I were to take an institution like Stanford, I would say it's a bundle of a series of items like, number one, education in the classroom. Number two, social club, bringing together a particular group of people. Number three, an athletic program or franchise. Number four, a research institution. And number five, a very large hedge fund. And these things all come together to form the modern university. And the question is the bundle of those things necessarily the thing that makes the most sense for any particular individual? And if you look at college and you look at the cost of college and you say, well, I'm going to college for the following reason. I'm going because I want to get a job. I want to be credentialed. Okay, well, what you really need is the education side of the puzzle. You don't necessarily need an athletic program in order to drive your ability to get a good job. On the other hand, other people may say, what I'm really looking for is to connect with the future elite of the school. All right, well, what you really want is the social element of it. And so the question really becomes, what is it that you are really looking for? Of course, if you have the luxury of plenty of money and connections, getting the whole bundle is great. And I happen to benefit from that, right? I got a chance to get the entire bundle of instruction and social and research and all of these different things, and I've managed to capitalize on it. But that doesn't mean it's going to be the same for everyone. There are plenty of my classmates from Stanford, for example, who are doing great work as teachers at elementary schools or high schools. Now, they incurred a cost in terms of loans or what have you that probably was around $250,000 in mid-1990s dollars, and goodness only knows how much it would be today. Is that really something where it made sense for them? If the economic pursuit they were going to pursue was never going to allow them to really pay off the student loans. So I do think that there is a place for college. The kind of college where you bundle everything together is probably more of a luxury item, and that we should think to ourselves, how can we provide bundles that are going to make sense for the majority of people?
And I think I've heard this note before that we talked Europe, obviously going overseas to play basketball instead of the United States. Something that I think other countries, especially those in Europe, do appreciate more is things like basically apprenticeships and trade schools. Yeah. whatever reason, the United States, I think, just hasn't adopted them as much. And it is one of those things that I think would be more useful, because it is one of those, I think we kind of say, when you get to be college age, you should just go to college. And for a lot of people, I'm hoping when my son's old enough, we're going to have this discussion. It's like, if you know what you want to do and it makes sense, great. Otherwise, don't. For myself, I'll say I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I went to Colorado State University, and it was very inexpensive, relatively. So I was able to get through that without debt. And that's the key. I think for a lot of people, they're like, if I didn't get any debt from college, it would definitely be worth it.
Yeah, and I'll just say, oh, go ahead, Chris.
No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say that, the difference between when we went to school in the 1990s and now for the cost, I think has changed that cost-benefit analysis, right? I went to public school too, Dre, and I got in really cheap, and it's a lot more expensive now. And, of course, private is even more expensive than that. So I think that's the big difference between now and the 90s.
Yeah, the other thing I would say is that there are great alternatives. So, for example, my son is looking at doing a program at Foothill College here in the Bay Area. And it is a community college program where you can attend this college. And remarkably enough, it is free for first-time, full-time college students. Doesn't matter how much money your parents make or have. It's completely free. They even provide the money for the books. They don't provide the money for room and board. That would be insane. But if you are able to stay at home in the area, you can go to college for free for 2 years. And then they have transfer agreements with 6 of the different UC schools, plus all the Cal State schools, that guarantee you admission if you have been able to achieve a reasonable GPA during your time in college. Now, that's pretty incredible. Now, what it doesn't do is it doesn't provide you with that sort of social club element of it that you would get from going to a small, expensive liberal arts college starting with when you were a freshman. But the question is that something that's important to you? Is it something that you want?
What's funny about that last note is I would also say sometimes getting a little bit of maturity before you hop into that can be useful, where it's, another year or two of aging before jumping into social club aspect stuff of college. I think that probably would have done me well, but, is what it is.
Yep.
All right. Well, let's definitely get to the Lakers because Chris, currently they have the best record in the NBA, and I think officially Milwaukee is still in front of them, but only just because of percentage, because they're 20-3 and the Lakers are 21-3. So obviously Milwaukee, at best they can tie, but whatever. Everything we were hoping for and more out of the Anthony Davis, LeBron James combo. A lot of what you said preseason, Dwight Howard still playing great, Rajon Rondo. In fact, the only player, and he has unfortunately been on our lower tier list pretty much the entire time we've talked about him together, Chris, is Kyle Kuzma. But anything you want to wax effusive on the Lakers, Anthony Davis and LeBron James together, we should just thank the world that happened.
Yeah, I would say that you may recall that when I predicted that the Lakers could win 70 games, I think much of the predictions have come true. If you look at the Lakers, obviously the big contributors are LeBron and AD. I actually had thought that AD would be the bigger contributor than LeBron, but LeBron has actually turned back the clock. He's actually 4th in the league in wins produced right now at a little over 5.5, and has done an incredible job. And AD has been a star as well. But he's not been quite as good as LeBron, which is amazing considering LeBron's age. So that has been great. I would also say that one of the things I'll take a victory lap on is when we talked about the Lakers. One of the reasons I thought that they had the potential to win that many games is because I was a big fan of the Dwight Howard signing, where I said this is a player who has been very productive in his career, provided people are able to get him to actually get into his head that there are things he's good at and things that he's not. He could actually be very good. And Dwight Howard has been an excellent backup center at the NBA minimum. He isn't as good as JaVale McGee, although many people would say Dwight is much better defensively. By the eye test, he does look better. But together, JaVale and Dwight have produced almost 3.7 wins, which is phenomenal coming from the center position. And of course, go ahead.
I was going to note just a weird strategy we've had about the center that we kind of saw the Warriors start this strategy, which was center by committee. Obviously, players like Clint Capella, Rudy Gobert, top of the league, you'd love to get that center. But there are lots of it's almost a Moneyball thing, like old relievers in baseball where they can't play the full game, but they're good for a couple innings. And can you get a bunch of relievers below market value and get a strong pitching staff that way? And funny enough, the Lakers have done that, right? With Dwight and JaVale. If you put those two guys together, they're cheaper than a good center and as productive as, a top 10 center in the NBA.
Yeah, they're probably going to earn together about $6.5 million this year. And obviously, if you can get a top 10 center for $6 million, you are doing pretty darn well.
Yeah, and then I also got to give Dwight some credit. So let's see, 1, 2. He's had 2 double-doubles where he's missed all of his free throws and had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of his 24 games. He has had 7 games where he's missed all of his free throws. Classic Dwight, but he's still a double-double blocking machine, which is fantastic.
And the other key is the free throws and the missed free throws don't really matter as much with his new role. Basically, what Dwight has done is he has embraced his inner Tyson Chandler. Throughout his career, he was meant to do 2 things, maybe 3. Play defense, rebound, and roll to the basket. And for whatever god-awful reason, throughout his career until now, Dwight Howard has thought that the best use of his talents was to post people up and labor through his robotic post moves. And this season, I think that this is still correct. He's posted up a total of 2 times.
That is awesome. Because I know that was what we talked him back in the day when he was with the Lakers and kind of the frustration that he played his first stint through the Lakers, he played very well. They made the playoffs before getting embarrassed by the Spurs. But obviously he wasn't 100%. And then you kind of noted that he was a frustrating player and just that he insisted on doing some things, And this seems to be, by the way, we were talking greatness like Charles Barkley. Charles Barkley has the most missed threes in NBA history, like below average, if that makes sense, right? So he is the most inefficient volume 3-point shooter in NBA history, which will be a hard mark to beat. And another player, Kevin Garnett, was a guy that just refused to take threes. He was a stretch 4 before there really was such a thing. And for whatever reason, he just hated taking threes and said, I don't do that. So, Dwight Howard follows this trend of amazing bigs that just for whatever reason, you're like, could you just do this? And they just would have something about them that said no.
So a couple of other notes about the Lakers. You mentioned Kuzma. So Kuzma has cost the Lakers 1.03 wins this season. And remarkably enough, in his career, every single season, Kyle Kuzma has rebounded more poorly and seen his true shooting percentage decline. So his rookie season to his last year to this year, each year, his rebounds per 36 minutes and his true shooting percentage has declined.
The Andrew Wiggins, we like to call it.
Although, Andrew Wiggins somehow turned it around. So I think that we Lakers fans are just going to have to hope. The other thing that you mentioned is, the Lakers had 2 late first-round draft picks that they could have kept given their salaries. That's Kyle Kuzma or Josh Hart. And Josh Hart this year continues, as he has been in the past, to be an above-average player. He's produced 1.37 wins. So if you can imagine, instead, if you remove Kuzma, substitute Hart, make the Lakers 2 wins better than they are now, that means that in theory they could be 23-1 instead of a pathetic 21-3.
Yeah, although we had 2 theories. The first one is yours, so I don't want to steal it. But you mentioned this pre-show that basically we've had respect in the past for David Griffin as a GM, and it's very easy in these talks to kind of hypothesize that one team beats the other and kind of underestimate how good they are. And it's possible that David Griffin recognized the value between the 2 and just chose correctly. And then we even said, the Lakers, as soon as the Pelicans said yes to an Anthony Davis trade, to just walk away from the table. And I think it was obvious, right?
Walk away saying yes, though, right? Not walk away saying no.
Yeah, we've called it the Patrick Picasso principle. It's by no means his because, of course, right, Chris, you and Reid Hoffman wrote a book, Blitzscaling, about this very concept too, and it's been around forever. This idea that in winner-take-all markets, getting the asset, even if you get it inefficiently, can trump, trying to be the most effective with your assets if it means you miss out on, the next big thing. So with Anthony Davis, it's like, yeah, if they could have kept Hart instead of Kuzma, Well, like you just said, that's a difference of 2 wins. But if that causes the trade to fall apart and they miss Anthony Davis, that's the difference between being a dynasty team. And then the other thing I have to give Anthony Davis is so advantageous to this team because after LeBron James retires, you now have another great player that can attract another star.
Yes, we'll be able to pair him with Giannis Antetokounmpo.
Yeah.
I basically said despite living in Milwaukee for a variety of reasons, I've had my issues with the Bucks, even though they're playing great. And the reality is it's not good for the NBA to have Giannis in Milwaukee. Kind of my own story. I went to a Chicago Cubs versus Milwaukee Brewer game a few years ago, and it was a tight playoff race, right? Because they're in the same division. And there were more Cubs fans in the audience than there were Brewers fans because Chicago is such a bigger market that there are already 2 teams in Chicago, right? The White Sox and the Cubs. Putting a third team in Chicago makes more sense than having a team in Milwaukee. And having the best player in the NBA in Milwaukee makes so much less sense than having him in Los Angeles. And I mean, we talk Kareem. It would be a very Kareemish thing for Giannis to go from Milwaukee to Los Angeles. And honestly, I'm rooting for it.
But on the plus side, the thing that the Bucks fans might console themselves with is that Kareem won them a championship before he forced his way to the Lakers. So maybe Giannis will be able to deliver a chip before he goes.
Yeah, doing the Kawhi route. Although that might have been it last season. They're playing great. Just kind of as a brief tangent, because this is going to be the Lakers show, but talking a few other teams, Milwaukee and Dallas are doing phenomenally right now. And what is remarkable about these 2 teams, it is almost a one-man crew. Giannis, we got to give a shout out to Greg Steele, another great guest we've had on the show. Preseason, he hopped on. I was like, I think the Bucks are going to take a step back because they let Malcolm Brogdon walk for nothing. And Brogdon is very much like the Kuzma Hart scenario we just talked with how well Malcolm Brogdon is playing in Indiana. If you've got a 20-win team and they could have kept Malcolm Brogdon, bullshit if you think that it's better. Like, you can console yourself. Oh, good.
Well, let's hold on for a second. So I agree that in a vacuum, letting Malcolm Brogdon go has been a terrible idea. But if you look at Milwaukee's roster and how they've performed this year, every single one of their guards has performed above average, the ones that actually play. And so George Hill is at a 359 wins per 48 right now.
It's doing absurd right now, yeah.
Eric Bledsoe, 191. Dante DiVincenzo, 191. Sterling Brown, 262. The only person who's been below average, and I don't count him as a shooting guard, I count him more as a forward, is Kyle Korver. He's still okay, .081. But again, we should have known this. Kyle Korver's been going downhill for a while. He's not getting any younger. So even though Malcolm Brogdon is a good player and they should have brought him back, thus far it has not bitten them in the ass.
And can I add one thing to that, Dre? So when we were really hammering the Bucks for this earlier in the year, the way I put it was basically they chose Chris Middleton over Brogdon, right? And Brogdon was outplaying him quite a bit. Well, Middleton is actually playing a lot better now, and he's a small forward. So you put him at small forward, put those really good guards that Chris is talking about in there, and the roster all fits together. So I think Chris is onto something here, at least for now.
What's frustrating is, right, if it was the Lakers, they would have just kept him all, right?
Oh,
yeah. That's the best point.
And then from my perspective, the state of Wisconsin basically footed a $250 million stadium for the Bucks. So when you are responsible for, giving a handout and then the team's like, well, we can't afford a championship team. It's like, well, what is even the point? So I'm still incensed. We'll see what becomes of it. Obviously, in large part, thanks to Kawhi leaving Toronto, the Bucks are poised to at least make a finals run, right? I think out east, I don't know who else I'm scared of at the moment. Obviously, Philly to a degree. Let's use this as one more bounce, right? One more inception on a tangent before we get back to the Lakers and then maybe Fizdale. Jimmy Butler, the Philadelphia 76ers chose poorly, right? They chose Tobias Harris over Jimmy Butler. I believe, Chris, you were looking at top wins producers. I believe Jimmy Butler is top 5, top 10 still.
That is correct. He is right after LeBron, number 5, I believe.
And Tobias Harris is close to an average small forward. So
below average as he has been throughout his career.
Well, I think if I recall Tobias Harris when he was younger, I think he was an above average small forward, but keeps getting placed at the 4. But then also one of these where he hasn't necessarily followed what we would. So he's had exactly one. It was with Detroit and Orlando. So right before he was traded to Detroit from Orlando, he played good on Detroit, and since, so basically for half of a season that was split between two teams when played as a small forward, he was an above average player. But in terms of should you take him over Jimmy Butler, he was never the answer. And something I didn't realize that I just saw picking up his career, right? He's been in the NBA since 2012. He's not a spring chicken either.
Now, as you know, they didn't really choose Harris over Butler. What they did was they chose Embiid and Simmons over Butler because those guys hated his guts.
Yeah, there's been reporting, Dre, in recent weeks that, basically Embiid said we got to get rid of Butler. Yep.
It's so frustrating, and he's basically a lot like Kobe, except instead of being the main player on the team, he's the second guy. Jimmy Butler with Karl Anthony Towns, and you said Jimmy Butler with Ben Simmons, Joel Embiid. It is frustrating as heck that basically Jimmy Butler just people don't want to play with him, even though he's a great player.
There's something to be said for actually getting along with people. And again, Jimmy Butler is somebody who's, I think, intense personality is actually a good fit with the Miami Heat. That's one where it's not just about the numbers on the court, it's also about the fit off the court.
Well, an interesting one there is I know when he was with who was the Thibodeau. Thibodeau's a very grind-nosed coach. Jimmy Butler's very grind-nosed. They're both older, so the rookies are like, the coach is riding me, the veteran is riding me, I don't want to play here. I believe Eric Spoelstra is known as more of a laid-back guy, so that dynamic might play well, because if Jimmy Butler's intense, then Spoelstra's like, hey, chill out, it's all right, it's fine. That dynamic can play, the good cop, bad cop dynamic. But when you have two, and you have an intense coach and an intense veteran, I could see young players going, no, I don't want to do this.
And again, the Miami Heat, who are led by noted softy Pat Riley, go out of their way to select players they view as hard-nosed.
Yeah, obviously, the New York Knicks back in the day, known for that. But I mean, Spoelstra, that's what I said. Spoelstra reminds me of Phil Jackson, where it seems like he's more, as a coach, is more laid back and is like, let him play. And I'm more of a fan of that. I don't like the hard-nosed coach mentality.
Good cop, bad cop. By the way, do you know what is really the big mistake that Milwaukee made this year?
All right, I want to hear this. What'd they do?
So Milwaukee is getting outstanding production across the board, except for the center position.
Yeah.
They have the Lopez twins, who are both doing terribly, and DJ Wilson, whoever he is. And so all their center minutes are going to negative players, not just below average players, negative players.
It's those good social connections they got at Stanford, Chris, that is getting them these jobs, I think.
The Lopez brothers.
It pains me to speak against the Lopez twins, who are proud Stanford students and who have a love of Disney and geek culture that we should admire in professional athletes. But they are just not very good at this stage.
Yeah, well, I mean, we should actually give them more credit on the other side. Last tangential shout out is Carmelo Anthony. We've noted the same thing. We were anti-Carmelo for most of his career, but I am frustrated at anybody that is viewing Melo now as an example of anything. He's just old. That is it. Players get old. Not everybody is LeBron James. And so Brook Lopez, let's give some credit here. Both Brook Lopez and Robin Lopez in their careers, I think Robin Lopez wins the battle of the twins in terms of on-court production, and Brook Lopez wins the battles of the twins in terms of pay. But both of them have been productive NBA players in their career that have, I should have just done the player comparison engine, Brian, but I think they've, put up over 30 wins each, right? That sounds right.
Let's see, we got him up on screen right here. So Brook has produced in his career. We got some load times here.
Yeah, I was trying to, but yeah, I mean, basically these players have both done well, and something we note about players is when it's over, it's over. So we never lament any player for taking a payday when they can get it. So, and we were talking the Mighty Ducks, a horrible movie where they note to the coach, the players didn't lose the game, the coach lost the game. if the Milwaukee Bucks want to offer the Lopez twins a bunch of money, that's on them. Whereas, Brook Lopez has produced 37 wins in his career. Robin Lopez, 42. Both fine careers and made money. So we can't really lament them. And being able to extend your career as long as you can, we're still fine with that as well.
And by the way, here's a fascinating and bizarre statistic. This year, Brook Lopez has been the poorer Lopez twin from three, shooting 28%, and yet he's hitting 93% of his free throws.
What happened to us? Because that was what made him he briefly looked above average for the Bucks when they first signed him, and it was his threes.
Yeah.
It's bizarre. I've also heard that he is a good lockdown defender, so there might be something to that. But even if you give him every logical break, they still should not have signed him. And, it's kind of I think to your point, Chris, right? It's easy to get into the battle of Middleton versus Brogdon when it's really the Lopez twins versus Brogdon. And we've said the same thing in the past. It wasn't Harden versus Westbrook. It was Harden versus Kendrick Perkins. And that's much more egregious.
And now imagine, if you will, that instead of the Lopez twins, that the Bucks had instead signed to a minimum contract, not Dwight Howard because we need him on the Lakers, but Nerlens Noel.
Wow. That is...
Nerlens Noel has produced 2 wins this season. By the way, that's only in 391 minutes. The Lopez twins have played well over double that. They've cost the Bucks nearly a win. If instead of losing a win from the Lopez brothers, they gained 3 or 4 wins from Nerlens Noel, they would currently be at 25 and -1 instead of a pathetic 22-3.
Yeah, I mean, we've said about the NBA for a long time that it's, no team is perfectly run. And so it can just get frustrating. But I think as things stand, we're on crash course for a Bucks versus Lakers finals, which I'm half behind. I think I'd actually prefer Philadelphia to pull it out.
Can I say one thing about that, Dre? So we have the Bucks and the Lakers we've been talking about, right? They're both doing really well. We've also got the Nuggets up at the top, the 76ers we were just talking about. What do all these teams have in common? They are just loading up on the front lines. And even if the Lopez twins aren't playing well on offense, the Bucks are still the best defensive team in the league. So, putting those big players out there is helping them one way or another. So, man, this has not been a small ball season, is all I have to say. Even the Clippers, who are looking great this season, don't always play centers, right? Sometimes they'll put Harrell in there. They're, of course, huge on the wings with Paul George and other, great defensive players, Pat Beverly. So, big teams are doing well this season.
And since we mentioned the Los Angeles Clippers, we have to at least make our obligatory mention of our friend, your boy, Ivica Zubac, who is producing, again, at a star level, over 2 wins this season, and continues to be a key part of that Clippers lineup.
I overlooked him. I gave Harrell all the credit, but yeah, you're right. He's been good too.
Yeah, we look set for a Clippers-Lakers conference finals, which is ideal. And then we'll have to see in the NBA finals because, like I said, I don't necessarily think the Bucks in the finals is ideal. I'm going to say, Chris,
let me add one more. Let me add another crazy theory that, again, I'm saying mainly to be provocative, but
come to the right place.
Come to the right place. The crazy theory would be that the Lakers are better off not signing Kawhi Leonard.
Ooh.
Well, he has been so. I'm curious for a variety of reasons. Obviously, Anthony Davis is, I think, better for a variety of reasons than Kawhi, as well as we are learning kind of in a not shocking way. This is something Patrick said, and we should give him a pat on the back for about Kawhi. Is load management. So Patrick, for those that don't remember, preseason put some bets out, and he bet the under on the Clippers. And his logic wasn't that the Clippers weren't a contender. His logic was, bullshit, you thought Kawhi was going to play a full season, and that has been the case so far.
And Kawhi has produced 2.3 wins so far. And with the money that the Lakers wanted to use to sign Kawhi but couldn't, they instead signed JaVale McGee, Danny Green, Rajon Rondo, KCP, and Avery Bradley. Now, I'm not big fans of KCP or Avery Bradley, but at least they're positive contributors, below average but positive contributors. But meanwhile, JaVale's produced 1.81 wins this season. Danny Green, 1.51. Rondo, 1.45. Caruso, by the way, they signed to a contract. That was thanks to the fact that they had money left over because of the not signing Kawhi. He's another 1.08 wins. So the Lakers are actually better off so far this season without Kawhi than they would have been with him.
Yeah, and I mean, some of that depth is going to it's exactly the point Patrick made about the Clippers, which is they're not going to be as good of a regular season team. No fault to them because Kawhi is not going to be there. And, they did obviously have to give up a bunch of their good assets to get Kawhi. No complaints. Exact same as Anthony Davis. We agree with that move. So it might end up benefiting them. The only real question is, can they get Kuzma into more of a guard role, or can they improve his production, or can they flip him? Because if they can any of those things, and the Lakers are, even more the best team they already are.
As with everything, the answer for the Lakers is Andre Iguodala.
Do you think that's? I know Memphis is just being cagey with it. Do you think that still happens?
It gets once we've gotten far enough in the year, Iguodala can just sort of say, "Look, I will give up some money to win another championship."
I thought that was already the case. I thought the issue was that Memphis just doesn't want to. They don't want to release him on his terms, so it's either he has to give up more than he was expecting, or they have to get a trade, and a team like the Lakers doesn't really have anything to trade for him.
That's right. But as the season progresses, as he keeps cashing his checks, the amount of money he has to give up gets smaller and smaller.
Right. Oh, that's a good analogy.
Memphis might be overplaying their hand because at some point he might just say, "Release me or we're done." Period. And I think. The funniest example of this was Josh Smith, where he was waived by the Pistons and they were paying him more than he was picked up to play for because he was getting like a $5 million a year check because they stretched and waived him. And then he was, signing for the minimum with teams. So whatever team signed him was paying him less than the Detroit Pistons were paying him.
So let's say Andre Iguodala gets 2/3 or 3/4 of the way through the season and just says, "You know what? I'm willing to give up most of the rest of my salary." The Memphis Grizzlies are like anyone else. They like money. If they can save a couple million, they'll go for it.
And I mean, it's rough because I made the joke with you last season, Chris, that every time the Denver Nuggets have looked like a contender, they have fallen to the Lakers in the playoffs. Except for last year. I was like, this is our shot, and they blew it. There was a double overtime or a quadruple overtime loss to Portland that cost them the series. Was a heartbreaker to watch, but I said, the Lakers gave them their out, and they didn't capitalize. They should have become the last ABA team to make an NBA Finals. They are still the only ABA team to have not made an NBA Finals. It is so rough. And I've joked that the Lakers, they'll just knock them down. I was very excited about the Nuggets to start the season. We'll talk them more in the future, Brian. Nikola Jokic has just not looked right. But I'm just expecting the Lakers to knock them off in the playoffs this season. And so getting Iguodala, it would be fitting because he's done that before too, right? Iguodala, takes teams to the finals.
Absolutely. Then a final note on the Lakers, because I think we've talked the Lakers pretty well. One final thought, just since we looked at the Kawhi question, let's take a look at the Anthony Davis question. Anthony Davis has produced 4.45 wins this season. The Pelicans currently have 5 players on their roster that are the results of the Anthony Davis trade. That's our friend Josh Hart, Brandon Ingram, Lonzo Ball, Jackson Hayes, and Nickeil Alexander-Walker. And so those players collectively, in many more minutes than AD has played, have produced fewer wins. Josh Hart is the only one of them that's playing at an above-average level. Sadly, even Lonzo is below average right now, although I hope that he'll tick back up. And it just illustrates one of those principles, which is, look, in basketball, having a superstar trumps everything else.
The one person I've heard be the most spoken about this is Jeff Van Gundy in interviews. And his axiom is the team that gets the best player in the trade wins the trade. And I think I've noted I've wanted to look at this more in depth than I have, but I have looked over the numbers. And I think the Chris Paul trade may be one of the few trades in NBA history. and even then I don't really think that's true, but I would say maybe you could make a case for it, where the team that gave up the superstar won the trade. And part of that might be what becomes of Montrezl Harrell, but, if it weren't for Chris Paul getting injured in the playoffs, they win a title. So it's very much the Kawhi Leonard point. We don't care what Toronto had to give up to get Kawhi. They won a title. It's over, right? Kawhi does nothing else for them. He wins them a title. So I think in NBA history, I don't think there are many cases where a star is traded and remains healthy, and you don't argue the team that wound up with the better star won the trade.
Very difficult to find any such example, and the only time it might ever make sense is where one of the players that was traded developed into a star. And the example here, do you know this one? One of our favorite. It involves one of the Wins produced favorite
Ben
players.
Wallace? Are you talking Ben Wallace?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But the reason I scrapped that one. So there are two. The Boxscore Geeks commenters, Chris, as you know, as you're one of them, and you're great, noted that the reality was Ben Wallace was a free agent, and this was just moving the deck chairs to make the trade work, because basically Ben Wallace wanted to sign with the Pistons, and when they were doing the trade, they were like, "Oh, this is a thing that happens all the time." Same with LeBron James. To make this so you don't come away empty-handed, we can trade. We can make sure that Grant Hill gets the contract he wants, and we can move things around so that everybody's happy. Right? Grant Hill's on the contract he wants with you. You sign Ben Wallace to this, so that makes it work. So that's the first part. And the second part, the reason I get to scrap that, unfortunately, is Grant Hill was injured. So if you listen to the beginning, the condition I gave it is when the star isn't injured, the better star wins the trade.
Yeah, can I push on? Oh, go ahead, Chris.
That being said, Ben Wallace was still greater than Grant Hill pre-injury.
Yeah, and the numbers. I've looked at that before, and the numbers basically say on a permanent basis for Orlando, he was great. And this is something, even one of the, I don't want to, slightly contentious. So John Hollinger, the inventor of PER, obviously there's been some contention among the Wages of Wins group and the PER people. His numbers have basically, he's argued this point that players that look good per minute when they're young, that get more minutes, tend to be better. So it's like, some people are like, oh, they're not going to be able to keep up that production if you give them more minutes. And John Hollinger is one of the people that's agreed. You look at the numbers, and that's not true. So Ben Wallace looked great at 20 minutes a game with Orlando. Detroit's like, what if we give him 30 minutes a game? And shocker, he played just as well.
Yeah, and I want to talk about the framing a little bit, because I think when you say which team won the trade, that's the traditional framing that analysts will use, but I don't think it's very useful, because if I'm running a team, I don't really care about the other teams, right? Unless it's like the division leader or something. What it really is what can I do for myself versus my other options with the amount of leverage I have. So that Clippers-Rockets Chris Paul trade is a great example, right? There's no question whatsoever, I think, that the Rockets won the trade, right? On the Jeff Van Gundy rule, they got the best player. But the reason why we say the Clippers did so well in that trade, which I totally agree with, is that they had no leverage at all, right? Chris Paul could have just walked away and they could have gotten nothing. So even though they didn't win the trade and do better than the Rockets, they still made a really good trade for themselves.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Agreed.
Last topic to just throw out, I guess maybe just a shout out, throw one out. Coach Fizdale was fired by the Knicks. And this is just an unfortunate one where, he's the 8th, 20th, 30th, 50th coach that's been fired under Dolan in the last 2 years or whatever. We brought up Dave Barry's research that says, compared to each other, so we're not saying coaches don't matter, but we're saying as a collective pool of individuals, very few coaches stand out from the field. So there are people like Phil Jackson and Greg Popovich that are absolutely worth the money. But if you're looking at like a replacement level coach, most coaches are indistinguishable from each other. So if you are trying to fix a defunct NBA team, you would not usually start with coaching. And so the Knicks doing this, we just have to say there are other places to look first. And, the Knicks are definitely a team there. We had some brief hope, right, when they traded for DeAndre Jordan, and thought they might be getting a big name free agent. But then, of course, DeAndre Jordan walked to the Brooklyn Nets and no free agents came their way. It's almost as if they're going to have to own up to something before they get better.
Hashtag fire Dolan.
Well, none of us are going to be able to go to a Knicks game now, right? Because Dolan doesn't like it when people criticize him.
With the Knicks, it's just a sad state of affairs. Here you have these natural advantages, massive media market. For all the reasons you described, New York has 2 basketball teams. It could have 4 or 5 basketball teams, and it would still be fine. And it just boils down to ownership is incompetent.
And, you know, it back in the day, it didn't quite work out the way I would have hoped because of injury. But Carmelo Anthony wanted to go to the Knicks. They had Donnie Walsh, a good GM, who had a plan. He had gotten a bunch of assets. And essentially, what could have happened is if you just waited to the offseason, they had the money to sign Melo off. And for whatever reason, Dolan pushed him to mid-season trade all of his assets for Melo. So come the next season, they don't have the assets. Somehow they still managed to build a decent team thanks to Jason Kidd, Tyson Chandler. Amari Stoudemire briefly looked decent again.
Pablo Prigioni. Don't forget Pablo Prigioni.
And then, of course, our favorite Jeremy Lin under Mike D'Antoni. And it just, it still couldn't hold together. And, the other funny thing at the end of that was, Jeremy Lin is a player that just has not been able to stay healthy. It's a real bummer. But the Knicks didn't want to re-sign him, and it was ownership. James Dolan was upset that this player that had gotten the Knicks tons of media publicity, that everybody loved, that marketing-wise had to easily be worth it, and he just said, "How dare you ask for a raise?" So, shocker, the Knicks made a stupid decision there.
Yeah, they could have Greg Popovich, Red Auerbach, and Phil Jackson coaching that team, and there's not enough good players there. Maybe Fizdale wasn't a good coach. Maybe they should have fired him, but it's not going to help them at all.
And by the way, one of the reasons why they hired Fizdale was they were attempting to lure LeBron over there.
Yeah.
And LeBron likes Coach Fizdale, and they were like, hey, let's get Coach Fizdale. Maybe LeBron will listen to us. And that didn't work out so well.
Good idea.
The Lakers over the Knicks, even no matter, again, the exact same point Brian pointed out. You could get any coach LeBron James wanted in New York, and I'd still rather play in LA every day of the week, especially on both sides of the coin. With a young core, the people they had before, we really did like Lonzo Ball and Josh Hart. I'd rather play next to them or another star like Kawhi or Anthony Davis. Absolutely. So there was no way I think LA was losing LeBron to the Knicks. It would have been hilarious if it happened.
Yep.
Let's say as long as we're going around the league, 1 or 2 other quick points that I just wanted to make. The first is that Jason Tatum has followed the Kyle Kuzma path of getting worse every single season, and is now well below average.
Yeah, because that is. Thanks for bringing that up because I've been looking, but that is amazing because for those that forget, when there was this big contentious race between Ben Simmons and Donovan Mitchell for Rookie of the Year, we said even if you have to disqualify Ben Simmons, Jason Tatum is playing great. He's all he was the spoiler for those that forget. Patrick always bets against the Celtics, and somehow the Celtics always wrong. And essentially that's what happened is Jason Tatum said, what if I play like the Rookie of the Year candidate no one sees coming, even though the Wages of Wins group thought he was a horrible draft pick. And so, and then since then he's just gone downhill. Part of it is, admittedly, he's playing bigger. I think that the Celtics, especially losing Al Horford, they've always kind of had a smaller than they should play. So I think playing him a little bigger hurts them. But even disregarding position, his production has gone down, which is a shame. He's forgotten how to shoot, which is odd. Hopefully he remembers how.
Boston needs to get the Time Lord in there for more minutes. He's getting buried on the bench. Robert Williams needs some run.
Love it. Okay,
that's my Celtics comment.
Any other? You said a couple other loose ends. So any other teams?
The only other loose end I was going to mention is that lost in all the hoopla, Paul George not playing that great.
Yeah.
Although, interesting timing, because if I recall, I think I just saw it before I sat down. I think he hucked up 16 threes tonight and played absolutely out of his mind. But to the exact same thing with Carmelo Anthony winning, player of the week. If a player has one good game, don't let it dissuade you if they've had 20 other games where they have not been good.
Yeah, and he's only played 13 so far.
Yeah, 36 points, 7 for 16 from 3, 9 rebounds, 5 assists, 2 steals, and a block. So an absolute astounding game, but I know how numbers work. So if he's been below average before that game, no matter how well he's played, it's still not going to be above average. Yeah. Am I still here? Or
yeah,
no,
we have no response.
This is the pass the ball podcast. We're all like, oh wait, go ahead. Yeah. So I mean, I've gotten all my topics in. Chris, thanks so much for being on the show. I'll give you your places to plug. So chrisye.com. Obviously, the book Blitzscaling. You've still been traveling all over the place for that, which is remarkable. I follow you on Twitter as Chris Ye. That's spelled YEH. And you that seems to have just been blowing up, which is just remarkable. So if you have any comments on that, I'd love to hear, and any other things to plug beyond that.
No, I would just say that Blitzscaling has been doing very well. I have traveled most recently to Egypt, to the city of Cairo, to speak at a conference. Speaking at a conference on Wednesday, thank goodness, here in the Bay Area. I expect to be in Dubai and several cities in India and probably China next year as well. So lots more Blitzscaling, hopefully coming to a city near you. And you can find it at blitzscaling.com.
Okay, and as you know, I always confuse ACL and Achilles. It's what I do. So you had that injury. So which of the two was it?
So I tore my Achilles tendon back on June 30th and had surgery July 2nd. So it's been a little over 5 months. I'm largely able to walk normally. Basically, it's just a question of building up the muscles in the leg. So I work out at the gym and do my physical therapy exercises for an hour a day. And hopefully I will be getting back to close to 100% by the middle of 2020.
And I just want to say, between all the travel and the Achilles injury, you're basically a basketball player, right? I think we can all agree on that.
Pretty much. I just wish I was getting Kevin Durant's $40 million salary this year.
Alex Caruso's contract and mural. We mentioned that pre-show. He got a mural out in L.A.
Yeah, let's talk briefly about Alex Caruso. So Alex Caruso is hugely popular among Lakers fans. It's due to the fact that he is one of the few young Lakers who's still around. He's actually pretty good. It was undrafted out of Texas A&M. He is obviously balding. He has a terrible haircut and a terrible mustache. Looks like he should be selling insurance or behind bars. And despite all that, he's still able to sky for dunks and drive the fans wild. So this one, here's to Alex Caruso, or Captain America, as the Lakers fans have taken to calling him.
And he is making $2.75 million a season. So to the same point, not very much in NBA dollars, but anybody on this podcast would take it.
That would be a good salary. I would happily take a $2.7 million salary. I'd happily take a veteran's minimum salary. And they wouldn't even have to let me play, although it would be nice to sit on the bench. I would gladly sit on the bench because that would be the equivalent of buying courtside tickets to every game.
That was a point Dave Barry made way back in the day when Shaquille O'Neal signed with the Boston Celtics. He said to get courtside seats to a Celtics game would cost this much. Shaquille O'Neal is making almost $1 million to do the same, so we'll take it. All right, Brian, I'll say anything you want to say. I'll let you be the final word before I lead us out of the show.
No shout-outs, just to you guys and to the great NBA season we're having. I'm going to watch the Warriors game tonight, and I'm enjoying them even though they're bad. So, yeah, it's been fun so far.
All right. Well, thanks so much. This has been the Boxscore Geek Show. If you found us not through the website, you can find us at boxscoregeeks.com. We go live every week, usually Mondays at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We went a little early this week, but kept it up. That's twitch.tv/nerd numbers. We have a podcast version of the show. You can find us on iTunes and Stitcher, the Boxscore Geek Show, as well as recaps on channel Nerd Numbers on YouTube. I've been your host, Ray Alvarez, aka Nerd Numbers. Brian Foster on Twitter as Boxscore Brian. Chris Ye on Twitter as Chris Ye, YEH again, if I didn't say it already. And again, thanks so much, Chris, for being on the show. Everybody check out Blitzscaling and go Lakers.
Go Lakers.